The sound of expensive titanium hitting Italian marble echoed through the foyer like a gunshot. Sarah Chen Morrison gasped, her hands instinctively flying to her 7-month pregnant belly as Marcus's phone shattered against the floor, pieces scattering across the pristine white stone. No. Marcus, the baby. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times, its deep bronze tones mixing with the steady drumbeat of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah's heels clicked across the marble as she bent awkwardly to retrieve the largest pieces of the destroyed phone, her movements careful despite the sharp pain radiating across her abdomen. Marcus Morrison stood frozen in the doorway to his home office, his perfectly pressed shirt wrinkled from where he'd grabbed it in frustration. At 45, he still carried himself with the arrogant confidence that had built his tech empire. But tonight his usual composure had cracked completely. "Listen to me," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I don't have time for your paranoid questions about Singapore. The Yamamoto deal is worth $50 million. Do you understand what that means?" Sarah straightened slowly, plastic fragments cutting into her palm. "I understand that this is the 3rd trip this month. I understand that you won't tell me why your assistant needs to go with you every single time. And I understand," she said, her voice growing steadier with each word, "that you just threw your phone at your pregnant wife." The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the tension crackling through the air. Sarah thought about that morning's doctor's appointment, how Dr. Martinez had smiled and said everything looked perfect. The baby was healthy, active, right on schedule. Now she felt a sharp cramping sensation that made her breath catch. "It slipped," Marcus said, but his eyes darted away from hers. "I wasn't aiming at you." "Don't be so dramatic." "Dramatic," Sarah repeated the word slowly, honestly amazed at how quickly her millionaire ex-husband could rewrite reality to suit his narrative. "Marcus, you screamed at me for asking about your travel schedule, then hurled your phone across the room. It hit me before it hit the floor." "You're being hysterical. Pregnancy hormones make women—" "We're going to the hospital," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through his explanation like a blade. Marcus was already reaching for his backup phone, the same model and the same titanium case. "It's probably nothing. The baby's fine. You're fine. I have a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. We're going now." The words came out harder than Sarah intended, carrying a tone she hadn't used with her husband in months, maybe years. Something in her voice made Marcus look up from his screen for the first time all evening. Really look at her. Sarah stood in the middle of their marble foyer, expensive heels clicking on broken phone fragments, one hand pressed to her belly and the other bleeding slightly from the plastic shards. Her dark hair had escaped its careful chignon, and her silk maternity dress was wrinkled from bending over. She looked fragile and fierce at the same time, and for just a moment, Marcus seemed to realize what he'd done. "Sarah, get your keys," she said quietly. "We're leaving." The drive to St. Mary's Hospital took exactly 18 minutes through the winding roads of Westchester County. Sarah counted every one of them, timing the irregular cramping sensations, while Marcus made 3 business calls through his car's Bluetooth system. She watched the familiar landmarks blur past the country club where they had held their wedding reception, the boutique where she'd bought her first maternity clothes, the coffee shop where she used to meet friends before Marcus's schedule began consuming every aspect of their lives. When had she stopped having friends who weren't connected to Marcus's business empire? When had her own architectural career become something she only discussed in past tense? When had she started walking on eggshells in her own home, measuring every word before speaking? The Yamamoto partnership represents the future of sustainable technology integration? Marcus was explaining to someone in Tokyo, his voice animated with the passion he used to reserve for her. "We're talking about revolutionizing how developing nations approach renewable energy infrastructure." Sarah pressed her palm against the window, feeling the cool glass against her skin. The rain had intensified, turning the world outside into a watercolor painting. She thought about the baby's ultrasound photos tucked into her purse, the tiny profile already showing Marcus's stubborn chin and her own delicate nose. Their daughter, they'd decided on, Grace, was due in 8 weeks. What kind of world was she bringing this child into? What kind of man would be her father? The automatic doors of St. Mary's emergency department whooshed open as they approached. And suddenly Sarah was surrounded by the familiar smell of antiseptic and the quiet efficiency of medical professionals. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair took her information while Marcus paced behind them, still talking into his phone about quarterly projections and market penetration strategies. "Ma'am," the nurse's voice was gentle but firm. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Sarah looked over at Marcus, who was gesturing emphatically while discussing supply chain logistics with someone who was probably in a different time zone. He hadn't heard the question. "My husband threw his phone," she said quietly. "It hit my stomach before it broke on the floor. I'm having some cramping." The nurse nodded without judgment, making notes on her tablet. "Any bleeding, dizziness, changes in the baby's movement. She's been kicking more than usual, almost like she's agitated. Let's get you into a room and have the doctor take a look." As they walked down the sterile corridor, Sarah caught her reflection in the darkened window of a patient room. She looked smaller than she remembered, somehow diminished despite her pregnancy. When had that happened? When had she become the kind of woman who quietly accepted her husband's anger as the price of financial security behind them? Marcus's voice echoed off the hospital walls as he explained to someone that he might need to reschedule tomorrow's board meeting. His priorities remained crystalline clear. Even now, 20 minutes later, Sarah lay on a narrow hospital bed, listening to the steady rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat through the fetal monitor. The sound filled the small examination room like a lullaby, strong and consistent and reassuring. Dr. Patricia Williams entered with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 2 decades delivering babies and managing medical emergencies. She was a tall African-American woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Good evening, Sarah. I'm Dr. Williams. Let's take this one step at a time and see how you and baby Grace are doing." She washed her hands efficiently while reviewing Sarah's chart. "I understand you had an impact to your abdomen this evening." "My husband's phone hit me," Sarah said, then immediately felt the need to explain. "It was an accident. He was frustrated about work and threw it, and I happened to be in the way." Dr. Williams nodded slowly, her expression neutral. "And how are you feeling now? Any changes in the cramping since you arrived?" "It's subsiding. Grace has been kicking more actively than usual, but the pain is definitely less intense." "That's good. Let's do an ultrasound to check on Grace directly, and I'd like to monitor you both for a few hours to be safe." Dr. Williams began setting up the ultrasound equipment with practiced movements. "Where is your husband now?" Through the thin walls, they could hear Marcus's voice rising and falling in the hallway as he continued his conference call. Words like market disruption and competitive advantage drifted through the door. "He's handling some business calls," Sarah said, recognizing how that sounded even as the words left her mouth. Dr. Williams applied the cool gel to Sarah's belly and began moving the ultrasound wand with gentle pressure. "There she is. Grace looks beautiful. Sarah, strong heartbeat, good positioning, normal amniotic fluid levels. The impact doesn't appear to have caused any complications." On the screen, Sarah could see her daughter's tiny profile. One small hand pressed against her cheek as if she were sleeping peacefully despite the evening's chaos. The sight filled Sarah with a fierce protectiveness she'd never experienced before. "She looks perfect," Sarah whispered. "She does, but I want to keep you overnight for observation, just to be absolutely certain. Sometimes these incidents can have delayed effects, and it's better to be cautious." Marcus chose that moment to enter the room, his phone finally silent in his hand. "How is everything? Are we good to go home?" "I'd like to keep Sarah overnight for monitoring," Dr. Williams repeated calmly. "The baby appears fine, but given the circumstances, observation is the safest approach." "Circumstances?" Marcus's voice sharpened. It was a minor accident. My phone slipped out of my hand. Dr. Williams looked at him steadily. Let's take this one step at a time. Mr. Morrison, your wife experienced abdominal trauma during pregnancy. Standard protocol requires observation. I have meetings tomorrow morning. Sarah, tell her you're fine. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the automatic response to smooth over Marcus's frustration. But lying on the hospital bed, listening to her daughter's heartbeat, something inside her resisted. I'd like to stay, she said quietly. Marcus stared at her for a moment. Then his phone buzzed with an incoming call. This is Yamamoto's people. I need to take this. He stepped back into the hallway, and within seconds his voice was carrying through the thin walls again. Dr. Williams waited until his voice faded before speaking. Sarah, in my 20 years practicing obstetrics, I've learned to recognize when women are walking on eggshells. Can you tell me more about what happened tonight? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah looked at the ultrasound screen, where Grace's tiny hand had moved to cover her eyes, and suddenly the words began spilling out. He's been traveling constantly for the past 6 months, always with his assistant, always for deals that require complete secrecy. When I ask questions, he tells me I'm being paranoid or hormonal. Tonight I asked why Melissa needed to go to Singapore again, and he exploded. Sarah paused, her throat tight. He called me ungrateful, said I didn't appreciate the lifestyle he'd provided. Hey, has he ever thrown things before? Not at me directly, but yes. When he's frustrated, things get broken. Usually his own belongings, but sometimes mine. He replaced my laptop last month after throwing it during an argument about my prenatal appointments. Dr. Williams made careful notes in Sarah's chart. Has the anger increased during your pregnancy? Everything has increased. The travel, the secrecy, the irritability. He says it's because the business is expanding internationally. But honestly, I think he resents the pregnancy, like it's inconvenient timing for his career goals. You know, Sarah, in my 20 years here, I've learned that money doesn't protect anyone from becoming a victim. Sometimes it just makes the cage more beautiful. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. A cage. Was that what her life had become? A beautiful, marble-floored, designer-decorated cage. She thought about her sister Jenny's expression last week when they'd met for lunch. The way Jenny had carefully asked if Sarah was happy, if she felt supported, if Marcus was excited about becoming a father. Sarah had given all the right answers, the answers that protected her husband's reputation and her own pride. But they hadn't been true answers. I keep telling myself that he's under enormous stress, Sarah continued, the words coming faster now. That building a company requires sacrifice from both spouses. That his success benefits our family's future. But honestly, Dr. Williams, I'm starting to feel like I'm just another acquisition he made. Valuable enough to maintain, but not important enough to actually consider. That must be very isolating. It is. I used to have friends, a career, opinions about things. Now I spend most of my time alone in our house, waiting for him to come home from business trips I'm not allowed to ask about. Through the wall, Marcus's voice rose as he apparently disagreed with someone about implementation timelines. Dr. Williams glanced toward the sound, then back at Sarah. I'm going to give you some information before you leave tomorrow, she said quietly, about support groups for women in your situation. You don't have to use it, but I want you to know it exists. I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of thing. That's okay, but promise me something. Sarah, start paying attention to how you feel when your husband comes home. Notice whether you're relaxed or tense, happy to see him, or bracing for conflict. Your instincts are trying to tell you something important. Marcus returned just as Dr. Williams was finishing her notes. Okay, crisis averted with Tokyo. Can we wrap this up and get home? I have the Kensington meeting at 7 a.m. Your wife will be staying overnight, Dr. Williams repeated firmly. You're welcome to stay with her or return in the morning. Staying overnight seems excessive for a minor bump, but fine. Sarah, I'll pick you up first thing tomorrow. Try to get some rest and don't worry about any of this. He leaned down to kiss her forehead, his touch gentle but somehow perfunctory. Everything's going to be fine. After he left, promising to handle the morning meetings remotely so he could collect her early, Sarah lay in the quiet hospital room listening to Grace's heartbeat on the monitor. The baby had settled into a peaceful rhythm, apparently reassured by the calm environment. For the first time in months, Sarah felt herself truly relaxing. No footsteps in the hallway to interpret, no phone calls to avoid interrupting, no mood to carefully assess before speaking. Just the gentle beeping of medical equipment and the knowledge that both she and Grace were safe. She was still thinking about Dr. Williams's words when sleep finally claimed her. Money doesn't protect anyone from becoming a victim. Sometimes it just makes the cage more beautiful. Outside her window, the rain continued falling on Westchester County, washing the streets clean. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital window as Sarah's sister arrived carrying a thermos of homemade congee and an expression of barely contained fury. Jenny Chen burst through the door like a small typhoon, her marketing executive energy filling the sterile room with warmth and urgency. At 35, she was 3 years younger than Sarah, but had always been the more outspoken sister, the one who asked uncomfortable questions and refused to accept unsatisfying answers. "Babe, what the hell happened?" Jenny set the thermos on the bedside table and immediately began fussing with Sarah's pillows. "Marcus called me at midnight with some story about you being clumsy and falling, but when I talked to the nurse this morning, she said something about abdominal trauma." Sarah felt the familiar urge to protect Marcus's reputation, to smooth over the ugly reality with a more palatable version. "We had an argument. He threw his phone, and it hit me by accident. It's not as dramatic as it sounds." "He threw his phone at you." Jenny's voice rose dangerously. "While you're 7 months pregnant, babe. That's not an argument. That's assault." "Jenny, please keep your voice down. It was an accident." "Was it, though?" Jenny pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, her dark eyes serious. "Sarah, I've been worried about you for months. You've become so quiet, so careful around him. That's not the Sarah I grew up with." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway with an enormous bouquet of white roses and an expression of remorseful concern that looked perfectly rehearsed. "Jenny, good to see you. Thank you for coming." He set the flowers on the windowsill and moved to kiss Sarah's cheek. "How are you feeling this morning, sweetheart?" "Any pain?" "Much better. Dr. Williams says Grace is completely fine." "Thank God. I've been up all night worrying." Marcus perched on the edge of the bed, taking Sarah's hand in both of his. "Sarah, I owe you a massive apology. Last night was completely unacceptable. The stress of this Yamamoto deal has me acting like someone I don't recognize." Jenny watched this performance with undisguised skepticism, but Marcus continued earnestly. "I've already called Dr. Peterson about starting anger management counseling, and I want to take you away from all this stress. What do you think about a baby moon to Hawaii? We could leave next week, stay at the Four Seasons. Just relax on the beach before Grace arrives." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of hope. This was the Marcus she'd fallen in love with, thoughtful, generous, willing to acknowledge his mistakes and make grand gestures to correct them. Maybe last night really had been an aberration, a perfect storm of business stress and exhaustion. "That sounds wonderful," she said, squeezing his hand. "Perfect. I'll have my assistant book the presidential suite for 10 days. We both need this." Marcus stood and checked his watch. "I should let you rest, but I wanted to make sure you knew how sorry I am. This will never happen again." After he left, promising to pick her up within the hour, Jenny stared at her sister with obvious concern. "Babe, that was a beautiful performance, but do you remember what he was like when you first started dating?" Sarah smiled, letting herself drift into the warm memories. "He was incredible. I was working on the architectural plans for his first office building. Remember, I was just some junior architect, and he was this brilliant entrepreneur with all these amazing ideas about sustainable technology. And he pursued you relentlessly." "He did. Private jet to wine country for dinner, surprise renovations to my apartment while I was visiting Mom, paying off my student loans without even asking." Sarah's voice grew dreamy with the recollection. I felt like Cinderella, like I'd been chosen for something magical. But think about that for a minute, Jenny said gently. He renovated your apartment without asking. He paid your debts without consulting you. He made major decisions about your life before you'd even agreed to be exclusive. Sarah frowned, the warm memories suddenly taking on a different cast. He was being generous. Or controlling. Babe, even fairy tales have dark undertones when you really examine them. Cinderella got rescued from her terrible circumstances, but she also became completely dependent on someone else's power and money. Before Sarah could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Williams entered with Sarah's discharge papers and a folder of information. Good morning, Sarah. How are you feeling? Much better. Thank you. Grace has been quiet all morning. Excellent. I have your discharge instructions here, and I've included some information about local support groups and counseling services. Dr. Williams handed over the folder with a meaningful look. Just in case you ever want to talk through any challenges you might be facing. After Dr. Williams left, Jenny picked up the folder and flipped through it. Support groups for women in difficult marriages, she read aloud. Babe, your doctor thinks you need this kind of help. She's just being thorough. It's probably standard information they give to all patients. Is it? Though, have you ever asked yourself why Marcus has been traveling so much during your pregnancy? Why he gets angry when you ask simple questions? Why you've stopped seeing your friends or talking about your own career? Sarah felt a sharp defensive reaction rising in her chest. Jenny, you don't understand the pressure he's under. Building an international company requires what? Throwing things at his pregnant wife, making you afraid to ask questions, isolating you from everyone who cares about you. I'm not isolated. When's the last time you called Rebecca or Amara? When's the last time you made a decision without first considering Marcus's reaction? The questions hit Sarah like physical blows. Rebecca and Amara had been her closest friends since architecture school, but she realized with growing horror that she hadn't spoken to either of them in months. Marcus had gradually made it clear that he found their girls' nights frivolous, their career ambitions unrealistic, their influence on Sarah questionable. They're busy with their own lives, Sarah said weakly. Or maybe you've become someone they don't recognize. The Sarah I grew up with had opinions about everything. She wanted to design affordable housing projects and change how cities approach sustainable development. That Sarah would never have accepted being screamed at for asking where her husband was going on business trips. Sarah stared at the folder in her hands, thinking about the enthusiastic young architect she'd been just 3 years ago. That woman had won awards for her innovative designs, had been featured in Architectural Digest for her work on green building standards, had dated several men without ever feeling the need to change herself to accommodate their preferences. When had she stopped being that person? Maybe you're right, she said quietly. Maybe I have changed. But honestly, Jenny, I don't know how to get back to who I was before. Everything about my life now depends on Marcus, our home, our financial security, our social circle. Even my pregnancy feels like it exists at his convenience. That's not true, babe. Grace is your daughter too, and you have more power than you think. Marcus returned precisely an hour later, as promised, with coffee and pastries from Sarah's favorite bakery. He was charming and attentive during the drive home, pointing out the early spring flowers and discussing potential names for the baby's nursery. But as they pulled into their circular driveway, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Marcus's jaw was tight as he checked his phone, and his movements had that controlled precision that usually preceded an explosion. Everything okay? She asked carefully. Fine, just some complications with the Singapore timeline. Nothing that can't be handled. As they entered the marble foyer where shards of his phone had scattered the night before, Sarah realized she was holding her breath, waiting to see which version of her husband would emerge, the charming man who brought her flowers and planned romantic vacations, or the one who threw expensive electronics when frustrated. The fact that she couldn't predict which one she'd encounter in her own home suddenly seemed like the most important information of all. That afternoon, while Marcus took calls in his office, Sarah lay on their Italian leather sofa and tried to remember the last time she'd laughed freely or felt genuinely excited about something. The exercise proved more difficult than she'd expected. Outside, the spring rain continued falling on their perfect lawn, and Sarah found herself thinking about cages again. Beautiful, expensive cages that looked like paradise from the outside. 3 weeks later, Sarah was organizing Marcus's home office when she found the receipts that would change everything. It was a Saturday morning, and Marcus had left early for his weekly golf game with potential investors. Sarah had offered to organize his business expenses for his accountant, something she'd done throughout their marriage as a way to feel useful and connected to his success. The office was Marcus's domain, all dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking their perfectly manicured grounds. His mahogany desk was covered with neat stacks of papers, contracts, and receipts from his recent travels. Sarah worked methodically, separating business meals from transportation costs, hotel charges from conference fees. That's when she found them. 2 hotel receipts from the Singapore Marriott, dated 3 weeks apart. Both showed a 7-day stay, not the 2-day business trip Marcus had described. Both showed 2 rooms booked under the same confirmation number. The primary guest was listed as Marcus Morrison. The secondary guest was Melissa Chang. Sarah stared at the receipts for a long moment, her heart beginning to pound. Melissa was Marcus's 25-year-old assistant, a recent MBA graduate who joined the company 8 months ago. She was efficient, attractive, and always seemed to require Marcus's personal attention for projects that could have been handled remotely. Sarah picked up her phone and called the Singapore Marriott directly, using her most professional voice. "Good afternoon. This is Sarah Morrison calling about a recent stay at your hotel. I need to verify some details for our corporate accounting department." The concierge was cheerfully helpful. Yes, Mr. Morrison and Miss Chang had stayed in adjoining suites on the executive floor. Yes, they dined together each evening at the hotel's restaurant. Yes, Miss Chang had charged spa services to the room. No, there hadn't been any other business associates with them during their stay. Sarah hung up and sat in Marcus's leather chair, staring at the receipts spread across his desk. 7 days in Singapore, adjoining suites, spa services, romantic dinners. While she'd been home alone, managing morning sickness and preparing for their first child, her millionaire ex-husband had been playing house with his assistant in one of the world's most romantic cities. The golf cart's electric hum in the driveway announced Marcus's return. Sarah quickly photographed the receipts with her phone, then placed them back exactly where she'd found them. By the time Marcus entered through the garage door, she was calmly sorting conference attendance certificates. "How was golf?" she asked, not looking up from her work. "Productive. The Kensington Group is very interested in the Renewable Energy Partnership." Marcus kissed the top of her head, then moved to his computer. "Thank you for organizing all this. I know it's tedious, but it helps tremendously. Actually, I have a question about these Singapore receipts." Sarah held up the hotel paperwork with steady hands, watching Marcus's face carefully. For just a split second, his expression shifted, a flicker of panic quickly covered by confusion. "What about them? They show 7 days at the hotel, but you told me the trip was only 2 days, and they show 2 rooms for you and Melissa." Marcus's jaw tightened, the same way it had before he'd thrown his phone 3 weeks earlier. "Sarah, I don't appreciate being interrogated about legitimate business expenses." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking about a discrepancy in your travel records. The trip got extended due to complications with the deal structure. Melissa needed to stay for the additional meetings. 2 rooms were required for propriety reasons." His voice was rising with each word. "I can't believe you're questioning my professional conduct like some paranoid housewife." "Paranoid housewife," Sarah repeated, standing slowly. "Marcus, I'm 7 months pregnant with your child, organizing your business affairs as a favor, and asking a simple question about an inconsistency. That doesn't make me paranoid. It makes you suspicious and distrustful. Do you know how that feels to work 18-hour days, building a company that will support our family, only to come home to accusations and skepticism. Marcus grabbed the receipts from her hands and threw them at her, the papers scattering across the office floor. You want to know the truth? Yes. The trip was extended. Yes. Melissa was there the entire time. She's brilliant. She's dedicated. And she doesn't spend her time creating drama about travel schedules. Creating drama. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the fury building in her chest. I asked one question about business expenses. You're implying that I'm having an affair with my assistant? That's not a question about expenses. That's an accusation about my character. I didn't say anything about an affair. You did. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus stared at her for a moment, his face flushed with anger, then turned and stormed out of the office. Sarah heard the front door slam, then the roar of his BMW pulling out of the driveway with excessive speed. She stood alone in his office, surrounded by scattered receipts and the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. Slowly, she began collecting the papers from the floor. As she worked, she thought about their conversation, replaying each exchange with growing clarity. Marcus hadn't denied having an affair, he'd simply deflected her question and turned her into the villain for asking it. She thought about her mother's advice when she'd gotten engaged. Watch how a man treats service workers and family pets. That tells you everything about his character. Marcus had always been charming to waiters and had genuinely loved their golden retriever, Max. But lately, even Max seemed nervous around him, staying close to Sarah when Marcus was home. Maybe the warning signs had been there all along, hidden beneath the expensive gestures and financial security. Marcus returned 4 hours later, carrying takeout from Sarah's favorite Thai restaurant and acting as if nothing had happened. He announced that he'd booked their Hawaii baby moon for the following month and expected her to be grateful for his thoughtfulness. I've arranged for the presidential suite at the Four Seasons Maui, he said, unpacking pad thai and spring rolls with elaborate care. 10 days of complete relaxation before Grace arrives. No work calls, no business meetings, just us. Sarah watched him create this performance of normalcy and devotion, recognizing it now as another form of manipulation. The explosion followed by grand romantic gestures, designed to make her doubt her own perceptions and feel guilty for questioning his behavior. That sounds lovely, she said, because it was easier than fighting. That night, Sarah lay awake while Marcus slept peacefully beside her, one arm possessively draped across her pregnant belly. She felt the baby kicking against her ribs. Grace seemed more active at night, as if she could sense her mother's restless energy. For the first time in their marriage, Sarah felt more alone lying next to her husband than she ever had when she was actually single. The realization was terrifying and liberating at the same time. She thought about Dr. Williams's words about beautiful cages, and Jenny's questions about the last time she'd made a decision without considering Marcus's reaction. Most importantly, she thought about the kind of mother she wanted to be for Grace, strong, independent, honest about difficult truths. Outside their bedroom window, the early spring rain continued falling on Westchester County, and Sarah began to understand that some storms were necessary for growth. 2 days before the Hawaii trip, Marcus's mother arrived for her monthly lunch, and Sarah overheard a conversation that shattered her remaining illusions about her marriage. Eleanor Morrison swept into their home like visiting royalty, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her designer suit impeccably tailored. At 72, she still carried herself with the rigid posture of old money and social expectations, but her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. "Sarah, darling, you look tired," Eleanor announced, air-kissing her daughter-in-law's cheeks. "Pregnancy suits you, but you need more rest. Marcus works you too hard." Sarah had always appreciated Eleanor's directness, even when it stung. "I'm feeling well, thank you. Grace has been very active lately." Indeed, active babies become energetic children. I should know Marcus was constantly in motion from the moment he could crawl. They settled in the living room while Sarah prepared lunch in the adjacent kitchen. The open floor plan allowed her to hear Eleanor's phone conversation when she thought she was alone, and the words stopped Sarah's hands mid-motion over the salad preparation. "No, Catherine was right to leave when she did, Eleanor was saying quietly into her phone. Marcus has always had a pattern with women charming pursuit, expensive gestures, then increasing control and isolation. Sarah is just like the others, young and naive and easily impressed by wealth. Sarah set down her knife and moved closer to the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding. The pregnancy makes it more complicated. Of course, Eleanor continued. Catherine left before children were involved, which was wise. But Sarah seems to be realizing what kind of man she married. I saw the fear in her eyes last month when Marcus raised his voice about something trivial. Catherine, Marcus's first wife, whom he'd always described as unstable and unfaithful. According to Marcus, Catherine had been jealous of his success, resentful of his travel schedule, and had ultimately had an affair with her personal trainer before demanding an expensive divorce settlement. But Eleanor was suggesting a very different story. I love my son, Eleanor said, her voice heavy with sadness. But I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean pretending their behavior is acceptable. Catherine tried to tell me what was happening, but I didn't want to believe it. I won't make that mistake again. Sarah heard the soft beep of Eleanor ending her call and quickly returned to her salad preparation, trying to look busy when her mother-in-law appeared in the kitchen doorway. Sarah, dear, we need to talk. They moved to the dining room, where Eleanor accepted a glass of sparkling water and studied Sarah's face with uncomfortable intensity. Who were you talking to about Catherine? Sarah asked directly, abandoning any pretense that she hadn't overheard. Eleanor didn't look surprised. My therapist. Actually, I've been seeing her since Catherine left, trying to understand my role in what happened. Marcus told me Catherine was unfaithful, that she had problems with jealousy and spending. Catherine was many things, but unfaithful wasn't one of them. Eleanor sipped her water carefully. She left because Marcus became increasingly difficult after their first year of marriage. Critical of her friends, dismissive of her career, angry when she questioned his travel schedule or spending habits. Sarah felt the familiar cramping sensation in her abdomen that accompanied stress. But the affair? There was no affair. Marcus spread that story to protect his reputation and justify the way he treated her. Catherine left with only what she'd brought to the marriage because she was afraid of what he might do if she fought for more. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Everything she'd believed about her husband's past was potentially a fabrication designed to make her feel superior to the woman who'd been smart enough to escape. Why are you telling me this now? Eleanor reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in her own. Because you're pregnant, and because I see the same look in your eyes that I saw in Catherine's during her last visit. Fear disguised as loyalty. I'm not afraid of Marcus. Aren't you? When was the last time you disagreed with him about something important? When did you last make plans without checking his schedule first? When did you stop calling your friends because he found them frivolous or inappropriate? Each question landed with devastating accuracy. Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd expressed a contrary opinion or made an independent decision. My dear, Eleanor continued gently, I love my son, but I've learned to see him clearly. Marcus needs to control everything around him, his business, his environment, his relationships. Women who challenge that need tend to disappear from his life. Then why did he marry me? Because you were talented enough to be impressive, but young enough to be molded. Because you came from a working-class background and were grateful for financial security. Because you were beautiful and accomplished enough to enhance his image. Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact but not unkind. And because you genuinely loved him, which made you willing to sacrifice pieces of yourself to keep him happy. Sarah thought about the enthusiastic architect she'd been 3 years ago. How Marcus had gradually convinced her that her career ambitions were unrealistic, her friendships superficial, her family intrusive. She'd thought he was protecting their relationship, but now she wondered if he'd been systematically isolating her. Catherine tried to warn me, Eleanor continued. She said Marcus would repeat the same pattern with whoever came next. I didn't want to believe her, but watching you over these past 2 years, I've seen it happening again. What should I do? That's not for me to decide. But I will say this: Catherine was wise to leave when she did, before children made the situation more complicated. And you should know that whatever Marcus has told you about prenups or financial dependence, you have more options than he wants you to believe. They finished lunch making small talk about baby preparations and nursery decorations, but Eleanor's words echoed in Sarah's mind throughout the afternoon. When Marcus returned from his office, Eleanor's demeanor shifted subtly, becoming more careful and deferential. "Marcus, darling, you look tired. Are you sleeping enough? Just busy with the Yamamoto expansion? Mother, this deal will set us up for the next decade." Sarah watched the interaction with new eyes, noticing how even his own mother seemed to choose her words carefully around him. How had she never seen this before that evening? As Eleanor prepared to leave, she embraced Sarah longer than usual. "My grandmother used to say that a woman becomes dangerous when she stops making excuses for the people who hurt her," Eleanor whispered. "I think you're almost there." Sarah. After Eleanor left, Marcus announced that he needed to cancel their Hawaii trip due to a business emergency in Singapore. "Melissa discovered some complications with the regulatory approval process," he explained, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "We need to fly out tomorrow to handle it personally." Sarah stared at him, thinking about Catherine's story and Eleanor's warnings. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. Could be a week, maybe two. But this deal is worth $50 million. Sarah, we can reschedule Hawaii after Grace is born." That night, Sarah lay awake listening to Marcus make travel arrangements through their bedroom wall. She heard him booking 2 rooms at the Singapore Marriott, confirming spa appointments, making dinner reservations for 2. Her millionaire ex-husband was taking his assistant on what was essentially a romantic vacation while his pregnant wife sat home alone. And he expected her to be grateful for the financial opportunities this represented. For the first time since their marriage began, Sarah felt something stronger than fear or sadness. She felt angry. And as Eleanor had predicted, anger was far more dangerous than grief. Instead of packing for Hawaii, Sarah found herself sitting in Dr. Martinez's office the following Tuesday, watching her blood pressure readings with growing concern. 140/90, Dr. Carmen Martinez said, removing the cuff from Sarah's arm with a gentle frown. "That's higher than I'd like to see at 32 weeks. Are you experiencing unusual stress at home?" Sarah had been seeing Dr. Martinez throughout her pregnancy and had grown to appreciate the older woman's direct but compassionate approach. At 45, with graying hair and kind brown eyes, she had the rare ability to make patients feel heard without judgment. "My husband had to travel unexpectedly," Sarah said carefully. "Business emergency in Singapore. Tell me more about that." Dr. Martinez settled into her chair with the patient attention of someone who had learned that the most important information often came in the pauses between words. Sarah found herself describing Marcus's sudden trip cancellation, his increasingly frequent travel, the way she'd begun to feel like an inconvenience in her own marriage. She didn't mention the phone incident or Eleanor's revelations, but somehow the stress of living with constant uncertainty came pouring out. Pregnancy can sometimes intensify existing relationship problems, Dr. Martinez observed. The added stress, changing dynamics, financial pressures, they all impact how couples communicate. "Marcus says I'm being too emotional, that pregnancy hormones make women irrational." Sarah, let me be very clear about something. Pregnancy hormones don't make women irrational. They often make women more aware of problems they've been minimizing. Your instincts are sharpened right now, not compromised. Dr. Martinez handed Sarah a folder of information. "I want you to consider attending a support group for women experiencing difficult marriages. It's not just for extreme cases, it's for anyone feeling isolated or like they're walking on eggshells." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of thing." "That's perfectly fine. But keep the information and know that recognizing you need support is a sign of strength, not weakness." 2 days later, curiosity and loneliness drove Sarah to the community center address listed in Dr. Martinez's folder. The support group met in a cheerful room with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, and Sarah was surprised by the diversity of women present, young and older, professional and working class, from various ethnic backgrounds and life circumstances. The group leader, a social worker named Maria Santos, had warm eyes and an immediately trustworthy presence. "We have a new member today. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?" "I'm Sarah. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm married to someone who travels constantly for business. Lately, I've been feeling very alone in my marriage, like I'm not allowed to have opinions or ask questions." Several women nodded with recognition, and Sarah felt a surprising sense of relief at being understood without needing to explain or justify. "That isolation is very common," Maria said. "Emotional abuse often begins subtly undermining confidence, restricting independence, creating financial dependence disguised as generosity." Over the next hour, Sarah listened to stories that felt uncomfortably familiar. Women whose husbands controlled their social circles, monitored their spending, dismissed their concerns as overreactions. The details were different, but the patterns were identical. During the break, Sarah connected with Lisa, a nurse in her early 30s who was going through a divorce from her surgeon husband. "How did you know it was time to leave?" Sarah asked. "When I realized I was more afraid of staying than of leaving," Lisa replied simply. "When I understood that my children were watching me accept unacceptable treatment and learning that love looks like fear." After the meeting, Lisa and Sarah exchanged phone numbers, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she had a genuine friend, someone who understood her situation without judgment or advice. That weekend, while Marcus was still in Singapore, Sarah met Lisa for coffee at a small cafe in town. It was the first social plan she'd made in months that wasn't connected to Marcus's business or social obligations. "Tell me about your marriage before things got difficult," Lisa said, stirring sugar into her latte. Sarah described the early days with Marcus, the romantic gestures, the financial security, the feeling of being chosen by someone powerful and successful. But as she spoke, she began to notice details she'd previously overlooked. "He paid off my student loans without asking," she said slowly. "At the time, I thought it was incredibly generous, but he also did it before I'd agreed to move in with him, which made it harder to say no to the relationship escalating." "Financial control often starts as generosity," Lisa observed. "My ex bought me a car during our second month of dating. Beautiful gesture." "Right, except it meant I became dependent on his insurance, his maintenance schedules, his approval for where I could drive it." Sarah thought about her current life living in Marcus's house, depending on his income, having no independent financial resources beyond her small savings account. When had gratitude become dependency? "The scariest part," Lisa continued, "is how gradually it happens. Each compromise seems reasonable in isolation. You give up friends who cause drama, skip career opportunities that might interfere with his schedule, stop expressing opinions that might create conflict. Before you know it, you've disappeared into someone else's life." That afternoon, Sarah called Jenny for the first time in weeks. Her sister's voice was immediately concerned. "Babe, I've been worried about you. How are things?" "Honestly, not good. Marcus is in Singapore again, supposedly for business, but I think he's having an affair with his assistant." "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "I think I am. Actually, for the first time in months, I'm seeing my situation clearly instead of making excuses for it." They talked for 2 hours, with Jenny offering both emotional support and practical advice. "You know you have options, right? You don't have to stay in a marriage that makes you miserable, even if you're pregnant. I keep thinking about Grace, though. What kind of life can I give her as a single mother? A life where she sees her mother being strong and independent? A life where she learns that women don't have to accept poor treatment for financial security?" That night, Sarah sat in her empty mansion, feeling the baby kick against her ribs while she looked through the support group information Dr. Martinez had provided. For the first time in her marriage, she felt more hopeful than afraid. Her millionaire ex-husband might have money and power, but Sarah was discovering something more valuable. A network of women who understood her situation and believed she deserved better. The baby kicked again, as if agreeing with her mother's newfound clarity. The annual Children's Hospital fundraiser was supposed to be Marcus's moment to shine, with Sarah as his perfect pregnant wife accessory, but instead it became the night her beautiful cage finally cracked open completely. The Marriott ballroom glittered with 500 guests, including Marcus's business associates, Sarah's former colleagues from the architecture firm, and most of Westchester County's social elite. Sarah wore a flowing navy maternity gown that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her hair swept into an elegant chignon, playing the role she'd perfected over 3 years of marriage. Marcus looked magnificent in his custom tuxedo, charming donors and investors with his vision for sustainable technology partnerships. He introduced Sarah to potential clients as my brilliant wife, the architect, but his hand remained possessively on her lower back, guiding her conversations and steering her away from topics he deemed inappropriate. During the silent auction, Sarah found herself standing with Richard Yamamoto, her former boss from the architecture firm, and his wife Helen. She hadn't seen Richard in over a year, not since Marcus had convinced her that maintaining professional relationships might create conflicts of interest with his business dealings. "Sarah, you look radiant," Helen said warmly. "When are you due?" "6 weeks. We're having a daughter, Grace." "How exciting. Are you planning to return to work after she's born?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah glanced across the room at Marcus, who was deep in conversation with potential investors, but seemed to have one eye on her at all times. "I've been thinking about it, actually," Sarah said, surprising herself with her honesty. "I miss the creative challenges of architecture. Maybe something part-time initially, focusing on sustainable housing projects." Richard's face lit up. "That's wonderful to hear. The firm has been developing an affordable housing initiative that would be perfect for your expertise. We've been specifically looking for someone with your background in green building standards." "Really?" Sarah felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in months. "That sounds exactly like the kind of work I dreamed about doing." "Let's definitely talk more about it," Richard said, pulling out his business card. "Call me after Grace arrives, and we'll explore how to make this work for everyone." At their dinner table, Sarah couldn't contain her enthusiasm as she described the potential opportunity to the other guests. "Sustainable, affordable housing has always been my passion. The chance to design homes that are both environmentally responsible and financially accessible feels like exactly what I should be doing with my career." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his charming smile for their tablemates. "Sarah's always been idealistic about her work," he said with what sounded like affection but felt like dismissal. "Pregnancy has made her nostalgic for her career days." "It's hardly nostalgia," Sarah replied, her voice growing firmer. "It's recognizing that I have skills and expertise that could benefit people who need good housing options." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah could feel the tension radiating from Marcus like heat from a furnace. During the charity auction, his hand gripped her arm just slightly too tightly when applauding, and his responses to her comments became increasingly curt. Later, near the silent auction tables displaying vacation packages and artwork, Marcus cornered Sarah behind a display of tropical getaway options. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Playing career woman? Talking about working after the baby arrives? You're embarrassing me in front of my business associates." Sarah looked around the elegant ballroom, noting that several people were within earshot of their conversation. "Marcus, I was discussing potential part-time work opportunities. That's hardly embarrassing. You're 7 months pregnant with our first child, and you're telling people you want to abandon motherhood for some ridiculous housing project. Do you have any idea how that makes me look?" "It makes you look like a husband whose wife has her own interests and abilities," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly. "Which should be a positive thing. Don't raise your voice to me. Not here." But Sarah was beyond caring about appearances or Marcus's reputation. "I've been an architect longer than I've been your wife. That doesn't disappear just because I'm pregnant." "It does if you want this marriage to work. My wife doesn't need to work. My wife should be focused on our family, not chasing some fantasy about designing houses for poor people. The words carried further than Marcus intended, and Sarah saw several familiar faces turn toward them with obvious concern. Richard Yamamoto was standing close enough to hear everything, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding. "I think we should continue this conversation at home," Sarah said quietly, humiliation burning in her cheeks. The drive back to Westchester was a 40-minute nightmare of Marcus's continuous criticism. He berated Sarah for undermining his authority, for making him look like a controlling husband, for prioritizing her selfish career fantasies over their family's needs. "You have everything any woman could want," he said, his voice growing louder with each mile. "A beautiful home, financial security, a husband who's built an empire to support you. And you repay that by announcing to my business partners that you're dissatisfied with being my wife? I never said I was dissatisfied with being your wife. I said I missed using my professional skills. Same thing. If you were happy in this marriage, you wouldn't need external validation from some pointless job." When Sarah tried to respond, Marcus slammed his hand on the dashboard so hard that the glove compartment popped open, spilling registration papers and emergency supplies across the floor. "Don't interrupt me," he shouted. "I'm tired of your selfishness, your ingratitude, your constant need for attention and drama." Sarah pressed herself back against the passenger seat, one hand protectively covering her belly. Grace was kicking frantically, as if sensing her mother's distress and fear. In that moment, sitting in a luxury car with her millionaire ex-husband screaming at her about gratitude and submission, Sarah realized she was genuinely afraid of her own husband. Not just annoyed or frustrated, but afraid of what he might do next. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, falling back on the automatic response that had kept their marriage peaceful for months. "You should be. And when we get home, you're going to call Richard Yamamoto and tell him you're not interested in any work opportunities. You're going to focus on being a mother and a wife, like you promised when you married me." That night, while Marcus slept peacefully beside her, Sarah called Jenny from their master bathroom, whispering into her phone like a teenager sneaking calls after curfew. "I need help," she said simply. "I can't do this anymore." "Thank God," Jenny replied immediately. "I've been waiting for you to realize that. What do you need? I don't know yet. But I know I can't raise Grace in a house where her mother is afraid to have opinions or career ambitions. I can't teach her that love looks like walking on eggshells. Then we'll figure out how to get you both somewhere safe. Tom's a family law attorney. Remember, let me talk to him about your options." For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she might have a way forward that didn't involve endless compromise and diminishing returns. Her narcissistic abuse was finally clear to her, and she was ready to start planning her escape. Outside their bedroom window, the spring rain continued falling on Westchester County, washing the streets clean for whatever came next. The next morning, while Marcus was at his Saturday golf game with potential investors, Sarah's rescue team assembled in her marble foyer like a special operations unit planning a liberation mission. Jenny arrived first, her husband Tom close behind carrying a briefcase and wearing the serious expression of someone who'd spent the night researching family law precedents. Dr. Martinez had agreed to make a house call under the pretense of a routine checkup, and Lisa from the support group brought moving boxes and the kind of quiet determination that came from having escaped a similar situation herself. "First things first," Tom said, settling his briefcase on the Italian leather sofa. "Let's talk about your legal position. Marcus's wealth doesn't automatically guarantee him custody or give him control over divorce proceedings." Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with terror. Just saying the word divorce out loud felt like crossing a bridge she could never walk back across. "What about prenups, financial dependence? He's always told me that I signed away any rights to his assets." Tom smiled grimly. "Let me see that prenuptial agreement. In my experience, wealthy men often exaggerate their legal protections to maintain control." While Tom reviewed the legal documents, Dr. Martinez examined Sarah's blood pressure and stress indicators. "Your readings are much better than earlier this week," she observed. "Stress levels seem to be decreasing despite the circumstances. That tells me something important about where your mental health stands." I feel clearer than I have in months, Sarah admitted. Scared, but clear. That's exactly what I'd expect to see. Your instincts are functioning properly now that you're not constantly suppressing them? Lisa had been quietly exploring the house, and she returned with a practical assessment. This place is gorgeous, but it's not a home, it's a showcase. I counted 3 different security systems and cameras in every common area. Does Marcus monitor your activities? Sarah felt embarrassed by the question. He says it's for our safety, but yes, he can see who comes and goes, what rooms I'm in during the day, even what I'm watching on television. Classic control mechanism, Tom said, looking up from the prenup documents. And potentially useful evidence if we need to demonstrate a pattern of surveillance and control. Jenny had been photographing important documents and came back with news that made everyone stop talking. Sarah, I found financial records in his office safe that show Marcus has been transferring money to offshore accounts for the past 6 months. Large amounts, we're talking millions of dollars. Tom immediately looked interested. That could constitute concealment of marital assets, which violates fiduciary duty between spouses. Can you photograph everything for the next 2 hours? They work systematically through the house. Sarah packed essentials for herself and the baby, including important documents, family heirlooms, and personal items that couldn't be replaced. Jenny documented financial records and questionable transactions. Lisa helped organize clothes and baby supplies into boxes that could be quickly loaded into cars if necessary. The strangest part was how liberating it felt to touch her own possessions again. Sarah realized she'd been living like a guest in Marcus's house, afraid to move objects or make changes without permission. I forgot that these were mine, she said, holding a framed photograph of her parents. Marcus put it away when we redecorated last year. Said it didn't match the aesthetic. I never put it back out. When did you stop displaying your own family photos? Dr. Martinez asked gently. I don't remember exactly. It happened gradually. My books moved to storage, my artwork replaced with his choices, my furniture donated to make room for his preferences. I thought I was compromising for the relationship. That's not compromise, Lisa said firmly. That's erasure. At noon, Eleanor Morrison arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small leather jewelry box and wearing an expression of determined purpose. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, taking in the scene of boxes and documents with obvious understanding. I brought some family heirlooms that belong to Grace, regardless of what happens between you and Marcus. Eleanor opened the jewelry box to reveal a collection of antique pieces, a pearl necklace, diamond earrings, a gold bracelet that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. These have been passed down through 4 generations of Morrison women, Eleanor explained. They're legally mine to give, and I want Grace to have them, whatever else happens. She's a Morrison by blood and deserves her inheritance. Tom looked up from his legal documents with interest. Mrs. Morrison, would you be willing to provide testimony about Marcus's behavioral patterns if this proceeds to court? Eleanor's answer was immediate and firm. Absolutely. I should have spoken up years ago when Catherine tried to warn me. I won't make that mistake again. They were so focused on their planning that nobody heard Marcus's BMW in the driveway until the garage door was opening. Sarah's heart began pounding as she realized they had about 30 seconds before he discovered their impromptu intervention. Everyone stay calm, Tom said quietly. We're having a family meeting to discuss Sarah's pregnancy needs. Nothing unusual or threatening. Marcus entered through the kitchen, still wearing his golf clothes and carrying his clubs. His mood appeared good until he saw the assembled group in his living room, surrounded by boxes and legal documents. What's going on here? He asked, his voice immediately shifting to the controlled tone that preceded explosions. We're helping Sarah organize some things for the baby's arrival, Jenny said smoothly. Dr. Martinez was kind enough to make a house call, and Tom's been reviewing some legal questions about wills and inheritance planning. Here, Marcus's eyes swept the room, taking in the moving boxes, the opened jewelry case, the documents spread across his coffee table. Sarah could see his mind working, calculating the threat level and planning his response. I wasn't aware we were having a family meeting in my home, he said, his voice growing colder. Sarah, did you arrange this? Yes, Sarah replied, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. I did. The admission hung in the air like a declaration of war. For 3 years, Sarah had avoided independent decisions that might displease Marcus. This was the first time she'd organized something in their home without his knowledge or permission. I see, Marcus said. And what exactly are we organizing for the baby that requires legal consultation and moving boxes? Tom stepped forward with professional calm. We're reviewing inheritance documents and discussing Sarah's needs during late pregnancy, basic planning that any responsible family should address. In my experience, Marcus said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass, lawyers who show up unannounced usually represent hostile interests. The room went silent. Sarah realized this was the moment of truth. She could either retreat into familiar patterns of appeasement, or she could stand her ground with the support of people who actually cared about her well-being. Tom is here because I asked him to help me understand my legal options, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I've been feeling isolated and controlled in this marriage, and I wanted to know what resources are available to women in my situation. Marcus's mask of civility finally cracked completely. Your situation, he exploded. Your situation is being married to a millionaire who provides everything you could ever want. Your situation is living in a mansion while carrying the child of a man who's built an empire for your security. My situation, Sarah replied, standing up slowly, is being married to a man who throws things when angry, monitors my activities with security cameras, and screams at me for having career aspirations. Get out, Marcus said, pointing toward the door. All of you, this is my house, and I want you gone immediately. Actually, Tom said calmly, this is the marital residence, which gives Sarah equal rights to invite guests and make decisions about household management. Eleanor stood up with regal dignity. Marcus, you're embarrassing yourself. These people are trying to help Sarah navigate a difficult pregnancy, and you're behaving like a petulant child. Don't you dare lecture me, Mother. You have no idea what I've built or what I've sacrificed to provide for this family. I know exactly what you've built, Eleanor replied sharply. I also know what you've destroyed in the process. Sarah looked around the room at her support network, her sister, her doctor, her friend, her lawyer, even Marcus's own mother, all standing united in their belief that she deserved better treatment. For the first time in 3 years, she felt truly powerful. I'm leaving, she said simply, her voice steady and clear. Grace and I deserve better than this. The words hung in the air like a benediction, and Sarah realized she meant them completely. Marcus's voice echoed through the marble foyer as he realized his perfect life was unraveling in real time, witnessed by an audience he couldn't intimidate or control. You're not taking my daughter anywhere, he said, his usual charm completely abandoned. You think you can manipulate me with this dramatic performance? You think I'll just let you walk away from everything I've built? Sarah remained calm, supported by the physical presence of 5 people who believed in her strength. I'm not taking Grace away from you, Marcus. I'm taking her away from an environment where her mother is afraid to have opinions. Afraid? Marcus laughed bitterly. You've never been afraid of anything. You've been spoiled, pampered, given every luxury imaginable. And this is how you repay my generosity, by recruiting my own mother and a team of lawyers to destroy our marriage. Tom quietly activated his phone's recording function, holding it discreetly at his side. Mr. Morrison, no one here wants to destroy anything. We're simply ensuring that Sarah understands her legal rights and options. Legal rights. She signed a prenup. She has no claim to any assets I acquired before our marriage, and she's contributed nothing to my business success during our marriage. If she wants to leave, she can walk away with exactly what she brought, nothing. Eleanor stepped forward with icy composure. Marcus, you're revealing exactly why Catherine left you. This belief that women are acquisitions to be managed rather than partners to be respected? Don't bring Catherine into this. Catherine was unstable and vindictive, just like Sarah is becoming. Catherine was intelligent enough to recognize narcissistic abuse when she experienced it, Eleanor replied sharply. And I was too blinded by maternal loyalty to support her. I won't make that mistake again. Marcus turned his fury on his mother. Narcissistic abuse. You're going to side with a woman who's trying to destroy your own son's family. I'm siding with the truth, Eleanor said calmly. I've watched you isolate Sarah from her friends, dismiss her career aspirations, and treat her like a beautiful accessory rather than an independent person. That's not love, Marcus. That's ownership. Dr. Martinez spoke up with medical authority. Mr. Morrison, I've been monitoring Sarah's stress levels throughout her pregnancy. Her blood pressure and anxiety symptoms have improved dramatically since she began addressing these relationship concerns. That tells me something important about the source of her distress. You're all insane, Marcus said, his voice rising to dangerous levels. I work 18-hour days to build financial security for our family. I've given Sarah a lifestyle most women can only dream about. I've been patient with her mood swings and pregnancy hormones. And this is my reward, a conspiracy to portray me as some kind of villain. Lisa, who had remained quietly supportive until now, finally spoke. Sarah, does this sound familiar? The part where he makes himself the victim and claims everyone else is conspiring against him. Sarah nodded, recognizing the pattern from her support group discussions. It's exactly what you told me to watch for. How legitimate concerns get turned into persecution of the abuser. Abuser. Marcus's voice reached a new octave of outrage. I have never laid a hand on you. Sarah, I've provided everything you could possibly need or want. If providing luxury and financial security makes me an abuser, then every successful husband in America is guilty. Abuse isn't just physical violence, Jenny said firmly. It's throwing phones at pregnant wives. It's screaming at her for having career aspirations. It's monitoring her activities and isolating her from friends and family. For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus seemed to realize he was losing control of the narrative. His business acumen kicked in, and he shifted tactics from rage to manipulation. Sarah, listen to me, he said, his voice suddenly softer and more pleading. These people don't understand what we have together. They don't see how much I love you, how hard I work to give you the best life possible. Pregnancy hormones are making you confused, but we can work through this together. Sarah felt the familiar pull of his charm, the desire to believe that love could fix everything wrong between them. But then she thought about Grace, kicking actively against her ribs, and what kind of woman she wanted her daughter to become. Marcus, do you remember what you said to me in the car last night? That I should be grateful for your money and stop having opinions that might embarrass you? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Word for word. Tom recorded everything. Marcus's face flushed with anger. You recorded our private conversation. I recorded a verbal assault, Tom corrected calmly, which in New York State constitutes evidence of emotional abuse in custody proceedings. The room went silent as Marcus processed this information. Sarah could see him calculating the legal and financial implications, weighing his options like any other business decision. You know what, Marcus, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. You're right about one thing. I was grateful. I was so grateful for your money that I forgot I deserved respect, kindness, and basic human decency. I was so grateful for financial security that I forgot my own worth. She stood up slowly, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward but somehow more powerful. But this baby reminded me of something important. I want to be a mother who shows Grace strength, not submission. I want her to learn that women don't have to choose between love and independence. And I want her to understand that real love doesn't require fear or silence. Marcus stared at her as if seeing a stranger. So that's it. You're going to throw away our marriage, destroy our family, take my daughter away from everything I can provide for her. I'm going to give our daughter something more valuable than money, Sarah replied. I'm going to give her a mother who refused to accept unacceptable treatment. Sarah walked to the foyer table and picked up her purse and car keys. She'd already moved her most important possessions to Jenny's house over the past week, following Tom's advice about strategic preparation. "I'll be staying with Jenny until after Grace is born," she said calmly. "Tom will contact your attorney about custody arrangements and financial support. And Marcus, I hope someday you'll understand that I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I finally remembered how to love myself." She walked toward the front door, carrying only her grandmother's jewelry box and a small overnight bag. Behind her, Marcus continued shouting about ungrateful wives and manipulation, but his words seemed to come from very far away. Jenny drove while Sarah sat in the passenger seat, watching their Westchester mansion disappear in the rearview mirror. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe deeply. "Are you okay?" Jenny asked. "I'm terrified," Sarah admitted. "But I'm more okay than I've been in years." That evening, in Jenny's comfortable guest bedroom, Sarah called Eleanor to thank her for her support. "My dear," Eleanor said, "I'm proud of you for finding the courage I couldn't manage 20 years ago. Marcus will try to punish you financially and emotionally, but you have more strength than you realize." That night, as Sarah lay in an unfamiliar bed listening to Grace's gentle movements, she whispered to her daughter, "We're going to be okay, little one. We're finally free." Outside Jenny's window, the spring rain had stopped, and Sarah could see stars for the first time in months. 6 months later, Sarah sat in her sunny new apartment, watching her 3-month-old daughter sleep peacefully in the afternoon light, streaming through windows Sarah had chosen herself. Grace Chen Morrison was everything the ultrasounds had promised: healthy, alert, and blessed with her father's stubborn chin and her mother's gentle eyes. She was currently sprawled across Sarah's lap in the relaxed abandon that only well-loved babies achieve. Having just finished nursing and fallen into the deep sleep of complete contentment, Sarah's one-bedroom apartment in White Plains was modest compared to the Westchester mansion, but every piece of furniture had been chosen for comfort rather than impression. The walls displayed her own photography and artwork, restored from storage after 3 years of hiding. Her architecture books filled built-in shelves, no longer banished to make room for someone else's preferences. Most importantly, the apartment felt peaceful. No security cameras monitored her movements. No expensive alarm system controlled her comings and goings. No marble floors created an echo chamber for shouted arguments. Grace could cry or laugh or babble without Sarah worrying about disturbing important business calls. The divorce had been finalized 2 months ago, with terms more favorable than Marcus had initially threatened. Tom's discovery of the hidden offshore accounts had strengthened Sarah's negotiating position considerably, and Eleanor's testimony about Marcus's behavioral patterns had influenced the custody arrangements. Marcus paid substantial child support and maintained legal visitation rights, but he'd shown little interest in actually spending time with Grace. His twice-weekly visits usually lasted an hour and seemed motivated more by legal obligation than parental affection. He brought expensive gifts and took photos for his social media, but he'd never changed a diaper or sat through a feeding. He loves the idea of being a father more than the reality of parenting. Sarah had explained to Dr. Martinez during Grace's 2-month checkup. Some men view children as extensions of their own ego rather than independent people deserving love and attention. Dr. Martinez had replied, "Grace will benefit more from one fully present parent than from 2 parents where one treats her as an accessory." Sarah had returned to Richard Yamamoto's architecture firm part-time when Grace was 8 weeks old, working 3 days a week on the affordable housing project she'd been passionate about for years. The work felt like returning to herself after a long illness, challenging, meaningful, connected to her deepest values about creating homes rather than showcases. Her colleagues welcomed her back with genuine enthusiasm, and Sarah realized how much she'd missed intellectual collaboration and creative problem-solving. Marcus had convinced her that her career ambitions were selfish distractions from family life, but working again had made her a happier, more fulfilled mother. The support group continued meeting weekly, and Sarah's friendship with Lisa had deepened into genuine sisterhood. Lisa was dating again a kind veterinarian who supported her career and enjoyed spending time with her children, and their relationship served as a healthy model for what love could look like without control or fear. "You look different," Lisa observed during their monthly coffee date. Younger somehow, even though you're sleep-deprived from new motherhood. Sarah adjusted Grace in her carrier, smiling as her daughter gurgled contentedly. I feel like myself again. It's amazing how much energy you have when you're not constantly walking on eggshells. Have you heard anything about Marcus lately? Eleanor calls occasionally with updates. Apparently, he's facing some legal troubles. 3 former female employees filed harassment complaints, including Melissa from Singapore. His company's board is conducting an investigation. Sarah felt no satisfaction in Marcus's professional difficulties, only a sense of validation that her instincts about his character had been accurate. The pattern of behavior she'd experienced wasn't unique to their marriage. It was how he treated all women who couldn't immediately escape his sphere of influence. What about financially? Are you managing okay? Sarah's divorce settlement, combined with her salary and a small inheritance from her grandmother that Marcus had never known about, provided genuine financial independence for the first time since college. She drove a reliable Honda instead of a luxury car, shopped at Target instead of designer boutiques. But every purchase was her own choice made with her own money. I'm more financially secure now than I ever was in that mansion, Sarah said. Turns out that having control over your own resources matters more than the size of those resources. Eleanor visited every Thursday afternoon, having transformed from distant mother-in-law to devoted grandmother. She brought homemade baby clothes, read stories to Grace in her precise patrician accent, and had become one of Sarah's most valued advisors. My dear, Eleanor had said during her most recent visit, watching you raise Grace has taught me what strength looks like. I wish I'd had your courage when Marcus was young enough to learn different patterns. You're helping now, Sarah had replied. Grace will grow up knowing she has a grandmother who supports women's independence and self-respect. During Grace's afternoon nap, Sarah often worked on freelance design projects from her kitchen table, sketching affordable housing concepts while her daughter slept nearby. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was doing her most meaningful professional work in a modest apartment rather than a $1 million home office. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. Dinner Sunday, Tom's making his famous lasagna, and the kids want to see their cousin. Sarah smiled, typing back her acceptance. Sunday dinners at Jenny's house had become a weekly tradition, providing Grace with the extended family connections that Marcus's wealth had never offered. Jenny's children adored their baby cousin, and Tom treated Sarah like the sister he'd never had. The transformation in Sarah's family relationships had been remarkable. Free from Marcus's subtle discouragement of family connections, she'd rediscovered how much she enjoyed her sister's irreverent humor and her parents' practical wisdom. They visited monthly from California, marveling at Grace's development and expressing quiet pride in Sarah's courage. You know, her mother had said during their last visit, I was always polite about Marcus because he made you happy initially, but I never felt comfortable in that house. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like you lived there. I didn't live there, Sarah had realized. I was just visiting someone else's life. As the afternoon sun shifted across her apartment, Sarah thought about the support group meeting scheduled for that evening. She'd begun co-facilitating sessions with Maria Santos, sharing her story with newly arrived women who were still trapped in the confusion and self-doubt that had once consumed her. The hardest part, she often told new group members, is trusting your own perceptions when someone you love consistently tells you those perceptions are wrong, but your instincts are trying to protect you. Learning to listen to them again is like recovering from a long illness. Last week, a young woman named Amanda had attended her first meeting, 8 months pregnant and married to a successful doctor who monitored her phone calls and controlled their joint bank account. Sarah had seen her own past reflected in Amanda's careful words and apologetic explanations. He says I'm too emotional to make financial decisions, Amanda had said, that pregnancy hormones make women irrational about money. Pregnancy hormones don't make women irrational, Sarah had replied firmly. They often make women more aware of problems they've been taught to ignore. Your instincts are functioning perfectly. You're here because something feels wrong, and you're right to trust that feeling. Women supporting women had become the foundation of Sarah's midlife transformation. Not the dramatic reinvention that magazines celebrated, but the quieter revolution of choosing authenticity over security, courage over comfort. Grace stirred in her carrier, making the soft sounds that preceded waking. Sarah lifted her daughter carefully, settling into the rocking chair by the window for their afternoon feeding ritual. "Tell me about your day, little love," Sarah whispered as Grace latched on contentedly. "Did you have interesting dreams? Did you practice your rolling over skills while Mama worked?" Grace's dark eyes, so much like Sarah's own, gazed up with the focused attention that made every mother feel like the most fascinating person in the world. Sarah traced her daughter's tiny fingers, marveling at the perfect miniature fingernails and the strong grip that could already hold onto toys. "You know what I want for you, Grace," Sarah said softly. "I want you to grow up knowing that your voice matters, that your opinions are valuable, that love should make you feel more yourself, not less. I want you to choose partners who celebrate your strength instead of trying to diminish it." A soft knock at the door interrupted their peaceful moment. Sarah checked the peephole and smiled, seeing Richard Yamamoto holding a folder of architectural plans and wearing the excited expression of someone with good news to share. "Richard, come in. Grace and I were just having our afternoon chat. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't wait until Monday to share this." Richard settled into Sarah's comfortable armchair, spreading blueprints across her coffee table. "The City Council approved our affordable housing proposal. We're breaking ground on the first phase next month." Sarah felt a surge of professional pride as she examined the plan's sustainable materials, energy-efficient design, beautiful spaces that would provide dignity along with affordability. This was the work she dreamed about doing when she first studied architecture, before Marcus had convinced her that such projects were financially impractical. "This is incredible, Richard. These families are going to have real homes, not just housing. Your design innovations made the difference. The solar integration and the community garden concepts impressed the planning committee. We're already getting inquiries about replicating this model in other cities." Grace chose that moment to release a magnificent burp, causing both adults to laugh and breaking the professional moment into something warmer and more human. "She's got excellent timing," Richard observed. "Natural architect, she knows when to interrupt with structural feedback." As Richard left with promises to discuss the next project phase on Monday, Sarah realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: uncomplicated happiness. Not the anxious gratitude that had characterized her marriage, but the genuine contentment that came from living authentically. That evening, at the support group meeting, Sarah shared her reflections with the circle of women who'd become her chosen family. "I used to think that leaving my marriage meant losing everything important," she said, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms while Amanda and three other newcomers listened intently. "I thought financial security and social status were the most valuable things a relationship could provide." Maria Santos nodded encouragingly. "What did you discover instead?" "I discovered that the most valuable thing a relationship can provide is the freedom to be yourself completely. Everything else, the career satisfaction, the genuine friendships, the peaceful home environment, flowed naturally from that foundation." Amanda raised her hand tentatively. "But how do you know if you're strong enough to make it on your own? What if you can't provide the same lifestyle for your children?" Sarah looked down at Grace, who had wrapped her tiny fist around her mother's finger with the absolute trust that only babies possess. "You provide something more important than lifestyle," Sarah said firmly. "You provide an example of what it looks like when women refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. Your children will carry that lesson with them forever." After the meeting, Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of White Plains, Grace sleeping soundly in her car seat. The spring evening was warm enough to drive with the windows down, and Sarah felt the gentle air on her face like a blessing. Her apartment building was modest: no doorman, no marble lobby, no security cameras monitoring her arrival. But as she climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, Grace's diaper bag over her shoulder and her daughter's warm weight in her arms, Sarah felt richer than she ever had in the Westchester mansion. She settled Grace into her crib, watching her daughter's peaceful face in the soft glow of the nightlight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a design deadline at work, a pediatrician appointment for Grace, a phone call with Tom about adjusting the custody schedule to accommodate Marcus's travel demands. But tonight, in her small apartment, filled with her own choices and her daughter's gentle breathing, Sarah Chen Morrison was exactly where she belonged. She thought about the woman who had walked on eggshells through a marble mansion, afraid to express an opinion or make a decision without permission. That woman had confused wealth with worth, luxury with love, submission with partnership. Now, holding Grace in their small but peaceful apartment, she understood the difference between being provided for and being valued, between impressive architecture and genuine home, between expensive gifts and authentic respect. Sarah tucked her grandmother's jewelry box into Grace's closet, saving it for the day her daughter would be old enough to understand the stories behind each piece, stories of women who had found strength in each other, courage in crisis, and hope in new beginnings. As she prepared for bed, Sarah whispered a promise to the quiet apartment. "We're going to build something beautiful here. Grace, not with marble and money, but with love and independence and the knowledge that we deserve both." Outside her window, the lights of White Plains twinkled like stars, and Sarah finally understood that sometimes the most important midlife transformation was simply remembering who you were before someone else told you who to be. The baby monitor crackled softly with Grace's contented sighs, and Sarah fell asleep smiling, dreaming of sustainable housing projects and Sunday dinners and all the brilliant possibilities that opened up when women stopped making excuses for the people who hurt them. In the morning, she would wake up to Grace's cheerful babbling and the spring sunlight streaming through windows she'd chosen herself. She would make coffee in her own kitchen, work on architectural plans that matched her values, and call her sister just because she wanted to hear Jenny's voice. It would be an ordinary day in an extraordinary life, the life Sarah had built from courage, supported by women who understood, and sustained by the revolutionary act of choosing herself. And in her crib, Grace Chen Morrison slept peacefully, already learning that love could exist without fear, that homes could be built on respect rather than wealth, and that the most important inheritance any woman could receive was the example of a mother who refused to disappear into someone else's story.